You've talked about the gender paradigm with intimate partner violence. And for the audience that's listening right now, can you describe what this is and how it shapes both how psychologists and social workers view the issue and how the police views the issue and the general public?
Well, the gender paradigm, I think, was coined by my colleague Don Dutton, who is another Canadian. I'm actually an American from Montreal. When I say another Canadian, you're Canadian, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So Don Dutton, formerly at University of British Columbia, I believe he's the one who coined the term the gender paradigm. A paradigm is a general way of perceiving the world, and the gender paradigm is it, it's the assumption that domestic violence is about male violence against women, and the gender paradigm is an assumption that's completely untrue. It's completely false, completely. Yes, of course, there are many men who are violent towards their female partners, but lots of women are violent towards their male partners as well. So the problem with the gender paradigm is that well, number one, it's certainly not fair to men who are falsely accused or who assumed to be guilty, and in various, he said, she said situations where the police and others just figure that, well, he must be the guilty one. The assumption, the gender paradigm is contrary to American law, where one is presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. So it's not only unfair to men; it's really it's contrary to principles of equality before the law. Furthermore, it has restricted the ability of people like myself, intervention providers, from properly doing our job. Think about it. If half of domestic violence is perpetrated by women and people deny that, and so what are we supposed to do with these women who are violent, who are abusing their kids, who are abusing their husbands? If they don't exist, well then, if we think that they don't exist, then we're not dealing with the problem. We're only dealing with half the problem. And that's, to me, that's something that is just uncalled for.
Yeah.
And by the way, let me just say this, and lest anyone think I'm some kind of right-wing, nutcase. I'm a staunch feminist from the 1960s. I grew up in the 1960s. Beginning in the 1960s, I wasn't that active, but I would say I was anti-war. I was liberal. I still am. I've always been on the side of the little guy, social justice, and that includes the rights of women. I was a strong supporter of second wave feminism, and I still am today. I acknowledge that for about 200 to 300,000 years, men have pretty much dominated in the world, and much of the world today that remains the case. So men also engage in the vast majority of physical violence outside the home. All these things are true. But when it comes to in the home, it's just a fact that women are as violent as men. The main difference is that because men on the whole are bigger and stronger, they tend to cause more damage. They also tend to be scarier. So there's a somewhat of a different dynamic between violence by men on women and the reverse. There are differences, obviously, but that's a far cry from denying the fact that women can be violent.
Right. And I think that nobody would deny that there are some very violent men that cause a lot of damage to both men and women and children. But to deny that female violence is even possible, to me, requires a certain kind of mental gymnastics that I can't fathom. In a certain way, like just my own 2 cents on the topic, is it's kind of a form of sexism against women. If you believe women are not capable of violence, then you're saying that they're a different kind of human being from men. Like they're not. It's almost treating them as if they are innocent children, as opposed to human adults with all the same capacity for good and evil that men have. So
That's correct.
I mean, it's a possible way to look at it. I know not everyone sees it like that.
That's exactly how I look at it. That's exactly how I look at it. Um, so you mentioned in your introduction that I'm the editor in chief of a social science journal. It's called Partner Reviews. We have, I think, somewhere around 60 to 65 members on our editorial board. Editorial board. I would say about 40 out of the 65 are women, and I'm pretty certain that all of them are feminists. Maybe one or two would claim that they're not, but I think they're claiming not to be feminists in comparison to third wave modern feminists that sometimes can advocate some pretty extreme positions. But generally, the way most people think of feminism, which is the cry for equality for women in the social sphere and legal matters and so forth, economically uh, and so forth. I, I don't know of anyone that I've ever worked with, no researcher I've ever worked with who's not a feminist. So these women are all feminists. They're all college educated, smart women. Um, and but they're also really good researchers, and they believe in the facts. And so um, when I see an article written by someone that identifies themselves as feminist, I know right away that it's going to be a lot of BS. It's just how it is. Um, so uh, if I read an article by someone that says they're a feminist, generally uh, I'm going to see the gender paradigm in all its glory. Um, why is it necessary for an individual to announce their political ideology when they're writing a social science paper? It's like a chemist, or a botanist saying, I'm a feminist botanist, or I'm a feminist chemist. It makes no sense whatsoever. Uh, the facts are the facts. Uh, when these women who spend, I'm talking about the psychologists, my colleagues who are women who work in the field of domestic violence and who um, are knowledgeable about domestic violence the way I am, and who rail against the gender paradigm constantly. People like Alexandra Lysova and Nicola Graham Kevin and others like them, Denise Hines, and so forth. Yes, they've told me, many times on many occasions that they just can't stand the way that women are seen by battered women's advocates. That battered women's advocates do reduce women, as you say, to almost like an infantile status, as being so helpless. And it's really insidious. It's not just that women are seen as victims at all times, which of course takes away their agency, but the motives ascribed to women who are violent are that these women are hitting their partners in self-defense. They're reacting to the men, or they're expressing anger. So when men are violent, it's supposed to be because they're trying to control their partners, either to maintain male privilege, which of course is nonsense. Some men, some men do may be so motivated, but that's not the primary motivation for most domestic violence. It's generally either a result of an escalated conflict, or it's the way an individual operates because of their particular personality structure. Generally has nothing to do with patriarchy or anything like that. But according to battered women's advocates and the scholars, quote unquote, who expound the gender paradigm, when women are violent, it's because they're just expressing their anger. They can't possibly be wanting to control their partner. So think about that. The idea that no woman would ever use violence as a way to control her partner. Why? Because I guess women don't have any agency. So my question, when I give presentations on domestic violence, I often pose the question, do we want to go back to the 1950s? Yes or no? Because if women are that helpless, why are they wanting to be CEOs and CFOs of corporations? Why can we trust them to be politicians and to lead us? Why would we ever elect a woman president of the United States if women are helpless little creatures? So obviously there is a contradiction there. Basically, the battered women's advocates are saying women are completely capable of doing all the things that men do, except in the home, they're completely helpless. And of course, that's an absurd it's an untenable and absurd proposition. If you're asking me why do they say those things, my opinion is that a lot of, let me put it this way, young women who been going to liberal colleges and maybe just are beginning to work to volunteer, let's say at a shelter, um, I would say that young woman is getting a liberal education, probably a heavy dose of liberal politics. Generally, colleges or professors at colleges tend to be pretty liberal. In fact, more than just liberal, pretty almost, radical.
Especially in
So,
the the social sciences and humanities departments. I think
yeah,
they're very concentrated in those. A little
right.
bit less in some of the hard sciences. But yes, you're correct. Yeah.
Well, so a young woman, let's say, who's got a liberal education and let's say volunteers at a shelter or gets her master's degree and decides to work at some agency um, and starts working with women who have been abused, the combination of her education, which is going to be very left wing, and all that that entails. By the way, I'm pretty left wing myself, but the the way that gender is thought of and the role of women in society can be pretty extreme as propounded in some universities, right? So if a young woman has a combination of those theories that she's been subjected to, and then is working with only battered women, only women who have been abused severely, then when you bring a battered man or domestic violence against men, it's not going to compute. They're just not, they hadn't thought about that. It didn't occur to them unless their dad or their uncle or somebody they know has been abused, in which case they'll maybe make up their own mind. So it's a combination for young people. It's a combination of ignorance and it's just a matter of trying to educate them. Now, the feminists who've been around for a while, especially the ones that work in the field, know better. And in my opinion, the vast majority of battered women's advocates who've been around for a while and who still refuse to believe that women can be violent or who seriously minimize the problem, I think are doing so for political reasons and for self-gain. It's just a matter if you've been working at a shelter or you're the head of a shelter, you're the public, say the marketing director, or you're working with the press for a particular organization, and this is your job, this is what you've been doing. You have kind of a vested interest in towing the party line. And I just think there's a lot of a willingness to not listen and a willingness to shut your eyes when it's convenient to do so. So I would say a combination of ignorance and a combination of just straight up being in denial and lying
Yeah.
for political and selfish reasons.
So I think thank you for that explanation. It's very true that it's become a politicized topic. Not all aspects of gender relations are political, but this one, starting kind of in the 70s, it seems like it took a turn in one direction. That reminds me of the Duluth Model, which I know you're familiar with. And the Duluth Model, was it Ellen Pence who was the founder of this? I heard actually, and this is the kind of power and control wheel, which is highly connected to the theory of patriarchy, that men have all the power and control in the world, and they use violence as an instrument to exercise it to keep women basically in their place. That's what they're kind of saying with this model. But she even herself admitted at some point in time later that it did not reflect the reality for most intimate partner violence cases. And yet, in many states and counties and cities, including in Canada, Australia, UK, like it's gone well beyond the United States. It is the dominant paradigm for how law enforcement, courts, and other practitioners, social workers view intimate partner violence, is that it's this one-way direction, male on female, male aggressor, female victim. They don't see the reverse, but also what's a puzzle to me is how do they explain same-sex IPV under the Duluth model. Like if a man
Yeah.
in a gay partnership hits another man, or it's a lesbian couple, where's patriarchy fitting into that?
Well, amongst the four general subgroups related to sexual orientation, you would have gay, straight men and women, okay, uh, gay men and lesbians. Lesbians engage in the highest levels of domestic violence. So riddle me that, you know.
Yeah.
It's just the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, which conducted about 10 years ago in the United States, is the largest social science survey of domestic violence. And the most accurate um, battered women's advocates cite it all the time. I cite it all the time. It's pretty clear that lesbians engage in the highest levels, not, not a whole lot, not twice as much as, others, but significantly higher. So yes, that does pose a conundrum, doesn't it? To be fair, there has been an evolution, and so the gender paradigm has shifted a little bit. I now call it the gender paradigm light. And so initially, the gender paradigm, the assumption was that men abuse women. This is the Duluth model. Men abuse women as a way to maintain their male privilege. That has changed. So now most battered women's advocates, most of them will say, we understand that men who are violent towards their partners do so for various reasons. It probably has a lot to do with the way they grew up, their childhood origin, their personality, and so forth. And we understand that many women are violent too for the same reasons. It's just that um, it happens so much more often by men as opposed to women. And as I said before, Warren, the view is that women, when they're violent, it's either in self-defense or it's because they're angry and they're taking out their frustrations as opposed to trying to control their partner. And that's completely wrong. So the paradigm has shifted a little bit, but of course, it's still not in line with the facts as we know them.